Welcome to another edition of Michigan Conservative Roundtable. Today we're going to talk about the Electoral College, where it came from, why it's still important, and who and why the people who want to change it, or get rid of it to be more accurate. So where did it come from, Marty? You can.
Well, it really came from, it was one of the many compromises in the original Constitutional Convention. They had really a lot of the same dichotomy we have now of big states versus small states. And, right now today we say New York, California, Texas. At the time it was Massachusetts and Virginia. And the smaller states, particularly the very small states, were afraid of Massachusetts and Virginia dominating federal politics, which was a very real fear because Massachusetts and Virginia were in a position to control most of the federal bureaucracy. So, the small states had something to fear. Why do we want to be part of something where our say is really going to be muted, if not totally erased, because of what Boston and Richmond might want, okay? So they came up with the idea, partly to ameliorate that, and partly to try to get away from public passions a little bit by putting a layer between the people and the president. So they came up with the idea of these electors. So basically, when we vote for a president, we're voting for the people who will actually vote for the president.
Right.
And the expectation was these electors would vote for whoever won the popular vote in their state. Okay? And it was decided, okay, we'll determine how many states get how many electors by the number of people that they have represented in Congress. That meant every state got 2 right off the reel, and then they're guaranteed one more, because every state's guaranteed 1 member of the House of Representatives. But then the bigger states with more representatives would get more electoral votes.
Right.
So that satisfied the Virginias and Massachusetts of the time, because their say would be somewhat greater, but it also, made the Delawares feel a little bit better because, it did improve, so to speak, their standing with regard to choosing a president. So that's really how it came about, was to try to make us one big nation, but recognizing minority rights.
Right. And one of the things that's important is that it is representative of the population. So it is a popular vote in that sense. What we're having is 50 plus 1, I think, if you count the District of Columbia, 50 separate elections. And then we tally up those electoral votes, and that's what elects the president when that number reaches 270, which is the majority. You want to touch on, Terry, why it's still important today?
Well, for starters, the Electoral College, kind of think of it as a continuation of the concept of a republic, okay? In democracy, and I've heard this said many times, I'm sure a lot of people have heard this, democracy is glorified mob rule, okay? So, and let's look at the last election where Trump won, but Hillary beat him by a couple million votes or something. And so what you got is basically, if we went off a straight democracy, you would have the likes of LA, New York City, DC maybe, highly populated areas dictating to the
Texas
lowly.
would be in there too.
Yeah, but you'd have the highly populated rural urban areas dictating to the maligned flyover country how to live, and so you can't go strictly by straight democracy mob rule. As they've already said, we vote for people who vote for us, that vote the way we voted. Michigan votes one particular way, and that's intended to keep California, with all their votes, dictating to the rest of the country how we're going to live.
Right. And we do live differently in this country. We don't live the same in Michigan as they do in Arizona, or we're very different in Michigan than we would be in New York City. You've been there.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a completely different lifestyle. It's much faster
Radically
pace.
different.
And so they see things differently than we do. I can guarantee you that the southwestern states would drain the Great Lakes with a big hose or a pipeline so they could have water to water their lawns. And that's our greatest resource here. are those Great Lakes. So who wants to get rid of it? That's almost a one-sided argument.
Yeah, you know what? I'm sure a lot of people have seen the sci-fi films, Hunger Games, and I've said this before as we rant about politics. I've said this before. I feel like I'm seeing our own modern-day version of Hunger Games playing out. And if for those who've seen the movie, or for those who haven't, but in the movie you got the glitzy, good time rock and roll city. They're living the high life, and they're dictating to the lowly flyover country how to live, and they're living in pitiful conditions. And I guess I just feel that if we did away with the Electoral College, we could find ourselves in some kind of warped scenario like that.
Well, Bill Maher's comments not too long ago about the Electoral College and how we're the flyover states and how we want to be them, we wish we were them. Nothing could be farther than the truth. I don't want to be anything like Los Angeles, homeless scattered everywhere, or New York City where people are packed in like roaches. If anything catastrophic ever happens, a whole lot of people are going to die in New York in a big damn hurry, because everything that comes into that state, particularly in the Long Island area, Manhattan, everything has to come in. So anything that stops things from coming in, they're screwed, and they're going to have a huge problem on their hands. It's the Democratic Party who wants to get rid of the Electoral College because they don't feel as though they can win federal elections. It isn't true. Of course they can. They just won 2 of the last 3. I feel like it's certainly a big step towards dismantling the Constitution and dismantling what this country is. Because as we slide into a one-party system, and once we get rid of the Electoral College, that's what we'll have. California's made no qualms about how they want to stack the vote with illegal immigrants, who they give them driver's licenses, they want them to vote. Recently, 140 Democrats voted against it being illegal for illegals to vote. So it's certainly on their mind.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I can't stress enough, and I've spoken about this before, and Matt just mentioned it a minute ago, these are really 50 separate elections. We're 50 sovereign states. We're 50 states that exist in our own right. Wyoming's got the moral right to not expect to be pushed around by the rest of the country. I don't care that they've only got 3 electoral votes. Wyoming is equal to Michigan, which is equal to California, which is equal to New York and Texas, and so on and so forth. And, Wyoming's got the right to not be pushed around by the rest of the country just because the rest of the country wants it. So it really isn't, with the presidency, it's really not about the popular vote. It's what each individual state wants, and we should keep it that way.
And what they're trying to do now is there's these 11 states, and I guess 5 other states are currently considering it. And here in Michigan, the legislature has, on 2 separate votes, each house, the House and the Senate in Michigan, have voted to give all of our electoral votes to the winner, or the winner of the popular vote. Where in California they've done it, Colorado they've done it. Like I said, eventually there will be about at least 16 states. And the pact goes along the line of once they get 270 electoral votes, it'll kick in, because that will elect a president. But until then, they won't. People are saying, it's not going to happen in 2020, it won't be ready in time, but probably will happen by 2024. You can kiss the Constitution and the Bill of Rights goodbye, see you later, because that's going to end. They're going to just do whatever they want with this country, and it'll be like the old Soviet Union when we were growing up. There was a ballot, one guy on it, vote yes. Those are your options. That's what we'll be getting into now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's very definitely a danger. I think there's always the possibility there's going to be some movement between states. California is losing population in nearby states, because California is becoming a hell of a lousy place to live, quite frankly. New York is losing population. So for me, I think part of it is hang on to the Electoral College long enough that there's more of a balance is brought in, that some of those votes do get siphoned away from the larger states, and a little more natural power gets into the smaller states. So I think there's some hope for the future. But I do agree, without the Electoral College, that hope is very, very badly dimmed.
Well, one of the problems is what you're saying, people are moving out of California and New York, but the people from New York are moving to Florida, which has got 29 Electoral College votes, and the people in California who have 55 are moving to Texas, which has 38. They just essentially end up flipping. So
That's a danger.
We
That's
won't
a danger.
accomplish anything by that happening.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, they want to bring in 1.5. Kristen Gillibrand wants to bring in 1.5 million Muslims, and they're going to load up an area like they did in Minnesota. The Obama administration placed 70,000 Somalis in Minnesota. And my wife went on a vacation a couple of years ago, and she said the western part of Michigan, if you know anything about western Michigan, it's very conservative. But when she went there on a vacation with our daughter, she said she could have just as well have been in Mexico, that tons of Mexicans are living there. And I'm thinking, I've been to the west side. The winters are brutal. I can't imagine why all these Mexicans would end up in western Michigan unless they were put there.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think it's to tip the balance of the House and and somewhat the Senate.
If they're there legitimately as citizens, then they're there legitimately.
Right.
But there's certainly some monkeying around going on with illegal immigrants, and I don't see any way around it. If you're here illegally, you don't have the right to vote.
Yeah,
Period.
well, a lot of people,
Period.
a lot of Democrats seem to want to get rid of that idea.
Yes, absolutely.
Because I think one of the reasons is blacks are leaving the Democratic Party in droves, and they need to replace them with someone else.
Yeah.
Someone else they can control.
And the Hispanic vote is about 1/3 Republican. Now that's among citizens.
Yes, citizens.
But still, I always want to try to hold hope for the future, and I realize these are very dangerous things. But the makeup of the states, it can change. It might not change that much. I'll concede that to Mac. We don't know. But like California was a reliably Republican state in the 60s and 70s.
Right.
So things can happen. We'll see.
TJ, you have anything you want to add before we wrap it up?
Just one final thought. In a previous video, we talked about the possibility of the next Civil War. Something like this, if the Electoral College goes down the tubes, that could very well become the trigger point. Some states are going to say, no way are we going to be pushed around by other states. And there it goes.
Yep.
They should be doing that about a lot of other things anyway, but TJ makes a great point.
That's just my big concern on this topic, is the trigger point. This could, and you know what? In the last couple of weeks, I was shocked at how prevalent it was news driven. I mean, you go to any news station and boom, there it was being talked about. And a month ago, it was talked about, but these last 2 weeks, it's like everyday topic now.
Right. Well, that'll wrap it up for this edition of the Michigan Conservative Roundtable. As we always say, be safe, watch your six, and don't tread on me.